Larry Roberts, who we will talk about in a few minutes, was in the audience. He'd been given the assignment by Licklider to build a network. Larry knew that he wanted to build a network, but he didn't know how to build it. He didn't know what to do. He heard about Barron's work, and Barron and Scott Pendlebury told Roberts about Barron's papers. Roberts went back to his office at ARPA, pulled the papers off the shelf because he had them. He just hadn't read them, and he read them. And that's what he used. We'll get to that. So Bob Taylor took over the IPTO after Licklider went. A couple of people, somebody in between, but he asked for $1 million to build a network. And the story is that he went into his boss and said, I want $1 million to build a network. And he left 30 minutes later with $1 million. And later on, his boss was asked, well, why did you give it so fast? I've been waiting for him to come and ask. So it was already there. So he appointed to Larry Roberts, the same Larry Roberts we talked about a little bit before, to build what became the ARPANET. And this is the original mission statement of the ARPANET. Develop techniques and obtain experience in interconnecting computers in such a way that very broad class of interconnections are possible, meaning a broad range of applications. Voice and data and video and all that kind of stuff. And to improve and increase computer research productivity through resource sharing. The money came from resource sharing. Computers in those days were rare, big, and very expensive. And even the U.S. government could not afford to give a computer to every research group. So they wanted to share those computers using a network. And that's what the basics of the ARPANET was. So it wasn't the bomb. Bomb didn't get the money. Resource sharing did. But it was the same technology. Larry Roberts wound up using the packet switching, standard message block switching that Barron and Davies had come up with independently. So that's what built it. So Roberts was a good guy. He was a pretty bright guy. And he came up with the basic ways to do this. He picked up an idea from a fellow named Wesley Clark to not have the computers that were going to be interconnected do the processing, but to offload the processor onto a separate little computer. So leaving the main computer to do its work, do processing or whatever. And he heard about Barron's work and he adopted that packet switching for the ARPANET. A fellow named Len Kleinrock figures here, but it's not clear how he figures. MIT boy, but he says he invented packet switch network. Davies has written an article, very vicious article, saying, ain't no way. There's nothing there. I've read the Kleinrock's MIT thesis proposal, and I can't tell. It was definitely about message queuing and things like that, but it's not clear whether it's really packet networks. But he says it is, and a lot of people agree with him, and and a bunch of people agree with Davies. But he's an important light here, because his work on message queuing and queuing theory is critical to how things wound up working. And the first ARPANET node was in his lab, and the first ARPANET message was sent in his lab. Here's somebody who's not really directly on the internet, but the ARPANET. He founded an augmentation research center, but he did the demo. It was the mother of all demos, and that's what it was. That's what he called it, the mother of all demos. And it was everything. It was the mouse and graphical user interface, and it was everything. He went on to work with Xerox PARC to develop the Alto, and that's where Steve Jobs saw the stuff and then put it off on the Mac, and that's history's all over there. So in 1968, an RFQ was sent out to 140 companies, asking to bid on building this separate little routing box. A little box that was going to trundle the packets around looking at the destination. 12 of those 140 replied. That's because the rest of them, some of them just didn't have the capability. But companies like IBM and AT&T certainly did. they decided that this was worthless. This packet switching stuff was stupid. It wasn't going to go anywhere. The right answer is circuit switching. You set up a pathway through the network. It goes from you to the place you want to talk to, and then you use it for as long as you want to, and then you tear it down when you're done. You've got a guaranteed amount of capacity. The response time is guaranteed. If you can set up the circuit, it's guaranteed. The packet stuff, there's no guarantees. It's best effort. Maybe it'll make there, maybe it'll get there, maybe it won't. You can't tell. So why would anybody want to use that? They didn't. And so AT&T and IBM both decided that this was useless technology. And even up to 1992, IBM, I was in a meeting with an IBM user group called SHARE, where a fellow from IBM said, quote, "You cannot build a corporate data network out of TCP/IP." End of quote. That was because there was no guarantees, and IBM SNA was all guarantees. If you didn't know anything about SNA, that was its purpose, was definite control. And none of that control was in IP, so you couldn't possibly do it. Anyway, they built it. BBN got the contract, and they put in the first node in October '69 at Len Kleinrock's lab, and then 3 more nodes at Doug Engelbart's place at Stanford Research, University of California, and University of Utah. Those were the first 4 nodes. It grew. It grew fast. Harvard and MIT got on in '70. We were part of the original expansion to the East Coast. It went international in '73. 200 hosts in 1980, 1081, 82 time frame. But this wasn't the internet. This was the ARPANET. Difference is that the ARPANET connected a computer at Harvard to a computer at MIT to a computer at Berkeley to a computer at IBM. It did not connect computers at Harvard to computers at IBM. It was just point-to-point stuff. It was 1 computer at each institution. Or if you had 2, then you had to have 2 different connections into the IMS, which were the little routers. Bob Kahn was at BBN. He moved to the ARPA IPTO as one of the participants there. Organized a big demo, which was an interesting story about the demo, which was in Washington. It was the first really big public demonstration of this thing. And they had terminals. They had a terminal where somebody could just sit at the terminal and look and connect to computers all over the country. And he was demonstrating that all day long. This was the guy who did Ethernet, Bob Metcalf. He was doing it all day long, and then a bunch of people from AT&T came in, all dressed up in their little suits. He wasn't. And he was demonstrating, and it crashed. And he turned around, it was the first time all day. He turned around and he saw all of the AT&T people smiling. And he said later, at that point he knew they were the enemy. Anyway, demo. Bob Kahn asked Vint Cerf, who's then a research fellow, research, just plain computer research, asked him to think about a different way to interconnect. To interconnect computers, the networks of computers to networks of computers, rather than a computer to a computer. The original one was NCP. The original protocol for the ARPANET was NCP, which was a computer here, a computer there, interconnect. Reliable communications, things like that. It was a good, solid protocol. We learned an awful lot from NCP. Found out good ways to crash the world. There was a couple of real big meltdowns of the NCP network because of issues of bit loss and other kinds of routing issues. Some very good papers done at the time, which are still valid today. But it was only this point-to-point thing. It wasn't a general network-to-network. So Kahn basically realized this wasn't going to be a success in the long run because you couldn't scale the backbone network that way. You really needed to have networks, sub-networks, interconnected with other subnetworks through a backbone. And he realized that and asked DINSERV to help. There's a project in France called Cyclades Network, which was done by Louis Bouton. And that was good stuff. He later on said that he was building a network that had to use the French telephone system as its support system, which meant he knew he could not rely on it. He had to build reliability in, not at the network level, but above that network level. So the reliability, the network just forwarded packets. That's all it did. It was forward packets, and maybe they'd get there, maybe they wouldn't, maybe they'd be misordered when they get there, maybe they would be duplicated. The applications at the end nodes had to be able to deal with all of that. And so that's where the smarts were. Smarts were in the end nodes, and then end nodes figured out, oh, I didn't get that packet, ask it for retransmission, or I got that packet twice, I'll throw one away, or I got them in the wrong order and I reordered. The end nodes had to be doing that stuff. That was the end-to-end model. That the network in the middle was just shipping bits around. Didn't know anything about what it was shipping. It was just shipping packets around. All it knew was the destination address, and it forwarded based on that. He called it a datagram network. No delivery assumptions, no nothing. Kahn and Cerf took that basic concept and built TCP/IP. And originally, this was IP-TCP. It was one protocol, a reliable delivery protocol. But a number of people looked at it and said, but that doesn't allow for many kinds of applications. Particularly a fellow named Danny Cohen, who was a graduate student here at MIT after being a graduate student at Harvard. He figured he wanted to run voice. Can't do voice over a reliable network. With a reliable network, how does it get its reliability? It figures that it lost a packet and retransmits. So it delays and says, oh, I didn't get that packet from you, so I'll ask for it again. And that takes seconds. People talking over an environment where the delay is sometimes seconds long doesn't work well. AT&T research in the 70s probably figured out that the round trip time for most humans, I'm talking, if we're in a conversation rather than in a broadcast like I'm doing now, but if we were in a conversation, I'd talk for a while and then I'd stop if I'm being polite. I'd stop. And for North American white males, which is the research subject pool that AT&T used, of course, what else would they use? It's 300 milliseconds. If you don't start talking within 300 milliseconds, I assume that you're not going to talk, and I start talking again. If that's the satellite telephones, if you remember those, the delay over that was such that it was longer than 300 milliseconds. So you had to come up with a protocol saying over, or I'm done, or you now, or something, to compensate for that fact. With a reliable communications protocol, you frequently get delays in the seconds range, which is not tolerable for us. So Danny and some others, David Reed of MIT as well, and some others, convinced Sprint to enable an unreliable delivery service, which made the people like AT&T believe even more that this was useless. Now you purposely put in something where reliability is not a goal. It's just deliver the packets. Don't try and fix anything. So added UDP to TCP and renamed it TCP/IP instead of IP-TCP because it was no longer one protocol. It was IP, which was the underlying protocol, the TCP or UDP or other kind of protocols on top of that, providing different services. The U.S. government did build a bunch of networks over time, and these were proof of concept of packet networks. It's very important stuff. And this is a little animation starting with the ARPANET. The green is ARPANET. Then the NSF came along and added some more as interconnected supercomputer centers as an alternative to the ARPANET. And then they upgraded from 56 kilobits to T1 and finally T3. And in this period of time between the T1 and T3 network, the ARPANET went away. ARPA was done its thing, it proved this good stuff could work, so there was no reason for that. And by 1995, there were no public government-funded networks. It was all commercialized. It was all commercial networks at that point. So, I mentioned this a few times. AT&T, IBM, the FCC, ITU, International Regulator, all believed that this thing was a useless toy. At the IBM user group that I was part of, Share, you get stickers you put on your badge to show what you're interested in. If you're into communications, it's an octopus because it goes everywhere. If you're into numerically intensive computing, you get a circle with a 42 in it. If you don't know what it means, you don't get one. I was the co-chair of the TCP/IP project, where we were trying to push IBM to support TCP/IP. Actually, IBM had some of the best IP people in the world at that time because they were running the NSF network from the T1 network up through the T3 network. IBM was actually running. We built the routers for it. And it was some very good stuff. But IBM corporate didn't believe in it. They believed in SNA. We chose a bumblebee. Why did we choose a bumblebee?
That's not supposed to work, but it does.
Aerodynamic theoreticians had proved that bumblebees couldn't fly. Bumblebees didn't give a crap, they kept flying. We, IBM had proven that TCP/IP couldn't fly. We didn't care. We were going to keep flying. So we chose the bumblebee to show that. It was, in the face of theory, practice actually works. This was one of those cases. So, this end-to-end piece was a core thing, which actually meant the network is what it is today. Not the network itself, but what you see as the internet. Whether it's Google or Facebook or Skype or whatever. That's what you interact with as the network. That came because of the end-to-end principle. Came because of the idea that the network didn't care what it was transporting. Without that core thing, we wouldn't have the net we have today. So this is Netheads versus Bellheads. If you haven't seen that Wired magazine article, read it. It's a really good article explaining how the people who are net people just didn't get the telephone folks and vice versa. The Bellheads were the telephone folks. And David Eisenberg wrote this paper called The Rise of the Stupid Network. He was an AT&T employee until shortly after he wrote the paper. The paper said AT&T should get out of the getting given away business. That the right thing to do is deliver packets. The network should only deliver packets. Now, this fundamentally enabled the net to be what it is today. It enables permissionless innovation. You and I can come up with some kind of new application. I can tell you about it. You can download another piece of software to do that, or you can write your own software to implement it, and then we can communicate. We don't have to have permission from anybody. Well, that's the ideal. In reality, if you're doing it from a corporate environment, you have to get permission from whoever runs the firewall. And there's a to-do going on at MIT right now about updating the MIT network. And one of the issues is whether indeed we're going to be able to do permissionless innovation here. And the answer is yes, but it's still going to be a step in the middle with the network's going to work. But this enabled a huge revolution in communications. The internet has taken over all communications, not just the few things that we thought it was, remote entry, remote terminals and things like that. It's taken over all communications. Every telephone call now internet's in the middle of it someplace. Whether it's purely internet or whether it's IP networks in the backbone telephone network, it's everywhere. But note that the internet in this sense is a parent revolution. It's not the revolution itself. The internet is not the revolutionary thing. The internet enabled revolutions. That is a paraphrase of a section in the Hunchback of Notre Dame, Victor Hugo. The chapter is called This Will Kill That. It's not in the abridged versions, but it's a very powerful little piece. It's 20 pages, 30 pages, something like that. And it's a conversation between the Archbishop of Paris and the King of France over the power of the printing press. Press itself was not the revolution. The press itself enabled revolutions. And that's what the internet has done. Everything that Victor Hugo writes about the power of the press, ideas on wings and things like that, apply 100% to the internet. Take a look at it. It's a pretty powerful thing, and it's very, very precognizant. So, a long batch of commercialization. Uncle Sam wanted to get out of this business, though there was complaints at the time. In the early days, there was no commercial use permitted on the net. It was a big to-do when somebody sent a salesman for a digital equipment company sent a note saying, here's a new computer or something, and he got all kinds of trash for that because it was illegal. Now, NSF relaxed it a little bit at one point to say, oh, you can do it if it's in support of research. So I could send mail to my ex-salesman and say how much this computer costs, and he can send mail back because we're supporting research. And then later on it got relaxed still some more. But really, Uncle Sam didn't want to be in the business of building the networks for the U.S. A bunch of critics at the time were saying, relax this, let people do whatever they want with it. But if they had been, we wouldn't have developed a commercial network. So it would have been just running on Uncle Sam's nickel. But the commercial internet started up in 1990, and that became the backbone which succeeded the NSF net, which succeeded the ARPANET. So by 1995, NSF net was closed, the ARPANET was closed, it was all commercial, 100% commercial. So the federal government was not funding any of those. Now, it was funding some of its own research networks, but not what was now the internet. The internet started with 1983, January 1st, 1983, when the ARPANET switched over to TCP/IP. That allowed networks at Harvard to talk to networks at MIT. And then, of course, the web changed everything. A bunch of years ago, I was asked what was my biggest surprise, sitting back there in those days, looking at the early days of the ARPANET. I got my first email account about 1971 on that. It was magic, but it took magic to do it. You typed incomprehensible jargon, and something magic happened. But it took something like that. It never occurred to me that the average person would use this. It was always going to be for scientists or something like that. So my answer to the question was, my biggest surprise was mom surfing. It never occurred to me my mother would use this thing. Not that she wasn't bright, she was. But it didn't occur to me that that would be the level of penetration of the real world, but have it so that she could use it from home and do things like find my Network World column on a weekly basis. She would go online and find it and read it and send me years about it. So the web changed everything because it made a human interface. Today's internet. We're in a cusp, but we've been in a cusp for a while, of what the future is going to bring. The net is now something between 5 and 10% of the GDP of the world. It's a big impact. It's the only big thing, international thing, that isn't regulated. We've had no regulations because in the day when they could have imposed them, they didn't believe the network was worth anything. It was a toy. When it was a toy, why regulate toys rather than getting lead out of them? There's no reason to regulate it because it wasn't going to be a value in anybody. It was always going to be just a research toy. So the regulators didn't seize the opportunity when they could. And so it missed everything. And so we came up to the current day without any regulations. But that puzzles the hell out of a lot of countries and a lot of companies. Russia, China, a bunch of those countries, we just didn't see a lot of regulation. Back a few years ago, to the beginning of the first Gulf War, Iran, Iraq's one of those. I can never keep them straight. The domain name for the country was being, the domain server was being run by a contractor in Texas. Iraq. He was arrested for doing business with the enemy. The domain name, country code domain name, was tied up in a Texas bankruptcy court. Talk to a government official, and any government. How the hell can their identity on the internet be tied up in a Texas bankruptcy court? They don't even have control of their own destiny on the net. That doesn't make any sense. Didn't make any sense then, and it doesn't make any sense now to those folks. So they want controls on that. They want the UN to take it over. There's constant battles about that. The most amazing thing, other than mom surfing, over the last 2 decades is we haven't had controls. We've had in-country controls, the Great Firewall and things like that. We haven't had international controls. A bunch of attempts at it, but we haven't actually wound up with any. India proposed to the ITU recently to re-architect the entire internet, so it's completely controlled by individual countries. A Westphalian concept of country controls its own destiny. But that didn't happen. Quirkily, but it didn't happen. So these are 10 decisions I think that brought us the internet we have today. First thing was use existing networks. Let's say telephone. Don't have to build a new physical infrastructure. Use what's there. Just layer it on top. So you could incrementally deploy it whenever you needed to. By doing that, networks are different. You had to use something which was a bearer service. It rode on top of different networks and made them all look the same. And that's what IP is. That was a core invention. Datagram-based rather than circuit-based, so that you can multiplex multiple conversations. With circuits, I could talk to CNN, but I couldn't be receiving mail at the same time. With datagram, with packets, I can be talking to multiple things at the same time because everything's multiplexed into these little datagrams. Creating the router function so it interconnects networks, splitting TCP and IP so that you can support things like voice and streaming data and streaming voice, things like that. It depends, ARPA, now then called DARPA, it changed from ARPA to DARPA to DARPA to DARPA under whim of Congress a number of times. But at that particular time was DARPA. They funded they funded Berkeley to stick the BBN TCP IP code into Unix and then made that available. So for $800, you could get a tape, a mag tape, that had a full network stack in it. And then, well, the few $100 you have to pay for an AT&T source license, but you did that, and they wound up that a company, instead of inventing their own protocol, like IBM and DEC and Xerox and Novell did, you bought this stack, which was much cheaper than one programmer for 2 months. And you have the full stack. So people started to use it. So it built up as more and more, it was the default way of communicating was TCP/IP. Up until 1983 at Harvard and at MIT, the average student or average faculty member or average staff person could not use the ARPANET. It was a connection, but only people with direct federal funding could make use of it. So it was restricted. We had to put filters up to allow only these limited number of folks. In 1983, a deal was made with Computer Science Network, CSNet, and the ARPANET that said that if you got your CSNet connectivity via the ARPANET, then anybody at your institution could use the ARPANET for email. And bang, overnight, we started generating hordes of students, generations of students who knew about the network and could use it. Because now every student, every faculty member, every staff member at any higher ed institution getting their CSNet connectivity through the ARPANET could use the ARPANET. Big deal. Overnight, it was a huge, huge thing. And students would leave the university, go out to companies and say, I can't live without this. I gotta have this. It's a drug. I gotta have this connectivity. Withdrawal symptoms. NSF did require TCP/IP on the net, so if you couldn't use .NET on it, you had to use TCP/IP. Even though the computers at both ends were DEC computers that spoke .NET, you had to use TCP/IP. That forced more organizations and more companies to support it well. Probably the biggest thing, though, was in the early days, back in the late 70s, I forget exactly what it is, VitSurf and others in that group offered TCP/IP to ISO. ISO was developing a next generation data protocol for the world, standard for that. And they offered this. They offered TCP/IP. And they offered that the future standardization would be done through ISO. If that had happened, it would have been AT&T developing technology for the internet. And you know how good AT&T is at developing technology. International Standards Organization. It's a worldwide standards organization. They went on to develop something called the OSI stack, protocol stack, which was a complete failure. But it took a decade of hard work to make it a failure. But this was a core thing, because it moved it away from something where the companies had to innovate to preserving the way that individuals can innovate. And that meant the internet could evolve into the next Google or whatever it is. The NSF acceptable use policy said that no commercial use, so therefore it developed commercial internets, was there when the feds went away, and a minimal regulation, because they didn't care, they didn't think it was worth anything. So, what's the internet future? I don't know. I've been just waiting for this regulation to show up any day now, the last decade. So I don't know what's going to be. If indeed something like the India proposal from last year, 2 years ago came through, it would be an entirely different thing. The innovation would be done by the carriers, by the telephone companies. An example of what happened, how that difference is a company called Docomo, which has a type phone service in China and Japan called iMode. iMode was the first of the cell phone companies, some cell phone services, to actually have pure internet connections. Before, other ones had something called WAP, which was a gateway, and you could only get to the sites that the telephone company wanted you to get to, and they had a business arrangement with iMode. Let anybody kind of anything. They would do billing for you if you wanted, but they didn't insist on being in the picture at all. Some kids came up with the idea of a Hello Kitty service, which was for 100 yen a month, it would pop up a Hello Kitty picture on your screen every few hours or something. And they got 5 million subscribers. That's $5 million a month for pictures of Hello Kitty. Now, what telephone company would AT&T have put up a Hello Kitty service? No. That's the difference that permissionless innovation gives you. It gives you the permission to do a Hello Kitty service, or Google, or Amazon, or any of those other things. This is a snippet out of a movie called The Touch of Evil. If you haven't seen it, it's a pretty amazing movie. Marlena Dietrich, Orson Welles. Orson comes into Marlena, who's working the books, and asks what his future is. Says, your future's all used up. You don't have a future. It doesn't. But a lot of people have thought about that for the internet for a long time. That what we really need is carriers in control. Because this best effort stuff, no guarantees, everybody doing whatever they want is complete chaos. In 1994, at a conference at Harvard, I said that there were two basic questions which were then unanswered. One was, who says who makes the rules? Not who makes the rules, because different rules are made by different people, and standards and things like that. But who says who makes the rules, and who pays for what? We still don't know the answer. And finally, 20 years ago, the U.S. government passed a law which made it illegal for you to be an adult under called the Communications Decency Act. And it required that you personally, you individually, if you sent something on the internet that somebody under 18 anywhere in the world shouldn't see, then you personally had to take, quote, effective action to ensure that nobody under 18 should see it. That's technically impossible, but that's what the law was. I was a witness for the American Library Association and the lawsuit against that law. This is why I said in court that what achieved the success of the internet is chaos. It's the chaos of innovation. The judge in his final ruling said the success of democracy revolves around the chaos of unfettered discussion and declared it unconstitutional. But will this platform, this forum for innovation continue? I don't know. Yeah. Any questions?
So hindsight is a wonderful thing to dream about. Had Tim Berners-Lee not come up with the web, what other things existed at that time that might have been the web?
There was Waze. There was a bunch of other. The hyperlink stuff was not new with Tim. He came up with the web browser, the web server, and the web browser. But somebody else would have, because that was a technology that was being widely done. A graduate student at Harvard was working on the same stuff, but it was confined to the individual machine rather than across the web. There was a number of people doing that sort of thing. So I'm not so concerned. I wouldn't be so concerned about that. Somebody would have made it, because the thing which the early doubters didn't understand was that speed increases. The connection speed, the original ARPANET connection speed was 56 kilobits. By the end of the NSFNet, it was 45 megabits. And the commercial networks were starting off with that and going up 100 megabits and more. And that changes the ability to carry stuff. Once you start doing that, then you need a better user interface. So somebody would have come up with something, maybe not quite as user-friendly as Tim did, but somebody would have come up with something. There are other things that would have killed it. ISO had taken over TCP/IP. Because if we look at what ISO did do the big standards bodies did do, for example, for voice over IP, that was the ISO came up with H323, which was voice over IP, but it was assuming a carrier in the middle. And the telephone company was running it all.
Alan Kay talks about the path not taken. We were mostly about the web and what we should have done instead. But was there a path? You said how we got what we did. Was there a place where you saw something that didn't happen that could have, that would have made it even better, like frustration?
I don't think so. I have not been, when Dave Clark, MIT, headed up a National Institute, whatever it is, panel on new architecture. What would you do differently? We thought about it. And there's certainly some technical differences. But the fundamental things of datagram, open access, end-to-end, the network's doesn't have to be aware of what's going on. Those were all things that, in retrospect, were a good idea. There were some technical things like not in a globally unique address space. Things like that would have made things better. And we tried for that and working on IPv6, but we didn't get there.
I was wondering if, given this story, are there other areas where you think the similar story is playing out, maybe in different fields?
I didn't quite hear that.
Are there other places where you feel this kind of story is playing out today, maybe in different areas, not on the internet side, but like other fields or other domains?
Yeah. Genetics and CRISPR. That's an unbelievable tool. Being able to shape genes to whatever you want. The future of that is amazing.
So can you elaborate on in what way you see the parallels?
CRISPR is a tool that almost any researcher can use. And they can do, and what their future, what they can do with it is unlimited. They can make you with a purple nose. I mean, whatever they want to do, they can do it. That has huge upside and huge downside. So we'll see. Right? Some of the stuff with the anti-cancer stuff, in relation to the anti-cancer stuff that's being done with it right now is mind-boggling. And it's not limited to just a couple of researchers someplace.
So it seems like I saw a little.
You can speak up.
It seemed like there was a little bit of conflict in this idea of regulation being a problematic thing when it comes to the internet, but you also have carriers who are trying to exert power, and then also major providers of content who are trying to exert market power. So my question for you, is there some role for governmental regulation helping trying to check that market power? And if so, how does that interplay work?
Yes. Once upon a time, we had competition in the internet service business. There were thousands of internet service providers and dozens in any particular environment. That's not the case today, particularly residential. Effectively, all internet service and residential is done by telephone companies or cable companies. They are incented to get in the value picture. AT&T proposed a while back that their internet service fee would depend on sales for companies. So if they were an internet service provider for Amazon sold a book or a wrench or whatever, they would get a piece of the action. That would be their service fee. That would be awful. Their whole fight in Washington right now over network neutrality is exactly this question. There's a regulation that says that the internet service providers have to deliver the information of their customers without impeding it. That's what network neutrality is all about. Carriers want to get out of that. They want to kill that. They say, oh, but there's no problem, we'll do it anyway. We know that that's not the case because we know there's been some, not a huge number, but some cases where the carriers have screwed with things. They've blocked VPNs or they've blocked voice over IP. So there is a role there. If we had competition, there probably wouldn't be a role. But without competition, then the federal government standing in and saying you have to treat your customers fairly is probably required. And last question.
Sure. You haven't said anything about security of the internet, which was designed without that in mind at all, oddly enough. And this is an area where I could see the government really, a case where regulation or of some kind to at least put standards in place that allow people to avoid, say, email hacks and things like that. And governments, I suspect, would be very opposed to this, as would many.
No, actually, many governments want that. But it's not that easy. The government, of course, can't act itself. It has to focus its action on somebody, saying, you do this. So government could say to an ISP, well, you've got to make sure that no phishing attacks gets to the customers. That means the ISP is in the content control business, which is exactly where you don't want them to be. Because then they control your access to political discussion, to medical discussion, whatever. So you don't want that. Now, it's not quite true that the TCP/IP and the network wasn't designed with security in mind. It was. It just relied on the end systems to implement the security for the end systems. Actually, it's extremely difficult, though not impossible, but very difficult, to spoof a TCP/IP session. So, man-in-the-middle attack is one of the ways you can do it. But if you're running proper with HTTPS, that's actually even harder. That's hard still. But the routing infrastructure says, if I send her this IP address, it's going to get to there. It's not going to get someplace else. It's going to get to there. And if it's a conversation, so a packet has to come back, you can be pretty sure you're talking to the right, to who you're addressing. Now, whether you're addressing the right person or not is a different question. And there's a story told by David Reed that says that they were thinking of putting in end-to-end encryption as part of the default in the early days, very early days. And they were told not to by the funding agency, which was DARPA. Now, I know that when we were doing IPv6, I wanted it so that every IPv6 node had a public key, private key pair. And that was in my presentation to say this is what IPv6 was. I took it out 2 hours before the presentation, because the patent holder said, great idea, $10 a node.
And what?
$10 a node. And so we had to take it out. It's a patent issue. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Your price is wrong. It used to be that you see